The call connected. Betty Rios stared at her phone screen, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. The voice on the other end wasn't the eager client she'd been chasing for 3 weeks. It was granite dragged across asphalt, cold and precise. "Pack your things, little bird. The window of exit is closing." "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong," she started, but the voice cut through her words like a blade. Blue loungewear. Second monitor showing traffic camera feeds. Coffee mug from the Denver conference, 2023. Her blood turned to ice. He was describing her, right now. "The car is downstairs." No, Betty whispered, her hand trembling as she pulled the phone away from her ear. Through the rain-streaked window of her high-rise apartment, she saw it. A black sedan, idling like a panther. A silhouette in a dark suit stood beside it, face tilted up toward her window. But let's rewind, because 15 minutes earlier, Betty Rios had been having the best night of her month. She'd finally cracked the encryption on the Henderson file, the one that would prove she deserved that corporate contract. 3 cups of coffee, 12 hours of work, and she'd done it. When her phone rang with an unknown number, she'd assumed it was finally the Smith Industries callback she'd been waiting for, her ticket out of freelance purgatory and into financial stability. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm responding to everyone. Click subscribe, like this video. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want me to miss them. Let's begin. Betty's finger hovered over the red button. One tap and this nightmare would end. Wrong number, simple mistake. She'd block it, maybe even file a police report if the creep tried again. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice came through the speaker before she could disconnect, reading her intention like she was transparent. "Hanging up on me would be unwise. Look, I don't know who you think I am, but you've clearly..." Betty Rios, 28 years old, freelance data analyst, Columbia graduate with a focus in cybersecurity and predictive modeling. He recited her life like he was reading a grocery list. "You live alone. 14th floor, northwest corner unit. Your neighbor in 14B is a flight attendant who's currently in Singapore, which means no one will hear you scream." The coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. Brown liquid spread across the boards like blood, and she couldn't look away from it, couldn't process the words still flowing through the phone speaker. "That's wasteful," the voice continued, and she could hear something that might have been amusement. "That was your 3rd cup tonight. You'll need the caffeine for what comes next." "Who are you?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, barely a whisper. "Names are currency, little bird, and you haven't earned mine yet. But you can call me what the streets call me if it helps you process this situation." A pause, deliberate and weighted. "They call me Shikang." The name hit her like a physical blow. She'd seen it in encrypted files she wasn't supposed to access, buried in the dark corners of financial networks she'd explored for clients who asked no questions and paid in cryptocurrency. Triad connections. Money laundering operations that moved through the city like ghost ships through fog. And bodies. Always the mention of bodies that disappeared when they became inconvenient. "I think there's been a mistake," she tried again, her analytical mind scrambling for logic in a situation that had none. "I'm just a data analyst. I don't know anything about whatever you're..." "The blue loungewear set you're wearing," he interrupted, and her whole body went rigid. "Cotton blend. Probably overpriced from one of those subscription boxes you keep meaning to cancel. The fabric's getting thin at the left elbow, where you rest your arm while you work. You really should throw it away, but you won't, because it's comfortable and you value comfort over appearance when you're alone." Betty looked down at her sleeve. The worn spot was exactly where he said it would be, a small thing she'd barely noticed herself. Her eyes darted to the window, to the curtains she'd left open, because she liked watching the city lights while she worked. The rain created patterns on the glass, distorting the view, but somewhere out there, he could see her. Or someone working for him could. "The monitor to your left is still showing the Henderson file encryption you broke tonight. Impressive work, by the way. The one to your right has your email open. 3 unread messages, 2 of them spam. One from your mother asking if you're eating properly." His voice remained steady, almost conversational, like he was commenting on the weather. "And in the center monitor, you're running a trace on this call right now, aren't you?" She was. Her fingers had moved automatically, muscle memory from hundreds of late-night paranoia exercises, running the number through every database she had access to. The trace came back empty. Not blocked, not encrypted, just empty, like the number didn't exist at all. "You won't find me that way," he said, and this time she heard something that might have been respect. "But I appreciate the effort. It shows you're thinking, even when you're afraid." "That's good. Stupid people don't survive conversations with me." Through the window, the silhouette beside the car moved. A gloved hand rose, and she saw the red ember of a cigarette flare in the darkness. The figure was looking up at her window, perfectly still, perfectly patient. "I answered the wrong number," she said, forcing strength back into her voice. "That's all this is. A wrong number. I don't know anything about your business. I haven't seen anything. I haven't heard anything. Just let me hang up, and we both forget this ever happened. There are no wrong numbers, little bird. His voice dropped lower, intimate and terrifying. Only witnesses who haven't decided yet whether they're going to be problems or solutions. You have 60 seconds to pack a bag. Laptop, phone charger, and that black jacket hanging by your door. The one with the hood. I'm not going anywhere with 55 seconds. The car is waiting. My associate is very punctual, but he's not very patient. Betty didn't pack a bag. Instead, she ran to her desk and grabbed the external hard drive containing 5 years of client files, research projects, and the kind of digital breadcrumbs that could destroy careers or end lives depending on who found them. Her hands shook as she yanked cables free, her mind racing through protocols she'd designed for exactly this scenario, the one she'd always assumed was paranoid overthinking. 40 seconds, Shi Kang's voice purred through the phone she'd dropped on the couch. You're not packing. You're destroying evidence. Practical, but ultimately futile. She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Her entire focus narrowed to the laptop screen in front of her, fingers flying across keys as she initiated the 7-pass wipe protocol. It would take 12 minutes to complete, 12 minutes she definitely didn't have, but even a partial wipe was better than leaving everything exposed. The building's elevator dinged from down the hallway. 14th floor. Her floor. No one else lives on this end of the building right now. She whispered to herself, a habit from too many nights working alone. Unit 14B was empty, the flight attendant. 14C had been vacant since the divorce 2 months ago. She was alone up here with whoever was coming. Her second monitor went black. Then the third. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the apartment into darkness, broken only by the glow of her laptop screen and the ambient light bleeding through the rain-soaked windows from the city below. That's not fair, she hissed, grabbing the laptop. The wipe was only 18% complete. She needed more time. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured, the sound of expensive shoes against cheap carpet. They stopped outside her door, and in the silence that followed, Betty heard her own heartbeat hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape. She backed away from the desk, clutching the laptop against her chest, eyes fixed on the door. The deadbolt was engaged. The chain was secure. The door was solid core, supposed to be nearly impossible to kick through according to the building manager who'd sold her on the security features when she'd signed the lease. The doorknob turned slowly, testing. Finding it locked. Last chance, little bird. Shi Kang's voice drifted from the discarded phone, almost gentle now. My associate doesn't like locked doors. They offend him. Tell him to get offended somewhere else, Betty snapped, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. She was terrified, yes, but underneath the fear was something else. Anger. She'd worked too hard, survived too much, rebuilt herself too many times to let some criminal with a phone and a fancy car take everything from her. The laptop screen showed 23%. Not enough. Not nearly enough. The first kick hit the door like a thunderclap. The frame groaned but held. The second kick came faster, harder, and she heard wood splinter. The chain ripped free from the wall with the third impact, screws bouncing across the hardwood floor like scattered dice. Betty ran, not toward the door or the window or any logical escape route, because there wasn't one. She ran to the kitchen, yanking open the cabinet under the sink where she kept the cleaning supplies. And, behind them, the fireproof safe she'd installed herself. Her fingers fumbled with the combination, her mother's birthday, her graduation year, reversed, and the door popped open. 29%. The laptop screen glowed accusingly as she shoved the external hard drive into the safe. She could hear the apartment door slam open, heard it bounce off the wall hard enough to crack plaster. Heavy footsteps moved through her space, confident and unhurried. She grabbed the bottle of bleach from under the sink and dumped it across the laptop's keyboard. The screen flickered, pixels dancing in protest, but the wipe continued. 31%. The chemicals would fry the hardware eventually, but not fast enough. Aggressive, a new voice said from behind her. Not Shi Kang. This voice was rougher, local accent buried under professional diction, but ineffective. Betty spun around. The silhouette from the street now had a face, sharp cheekbones, cold eyes, a scar that cut through his left eyebrow like a question mark. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Rain darkened his shoulders, and water dripped from his shoes onto her floor, leaving marks like footprints in snow. He held out his hand, not threatening, just expectant. The laptop. Now. It's wiping, she said, backing against the counter. You can't stop it. No, he agreed, pulling a device from his pocket that looked like a phone but definitely wasn't. But I can image the drive before the wipe completes. 33% means I still get 67% of whatever you're trying to hide. Basic math. He took a step closer. Betty grabbed the chef's knife from the magnetic strip behind her. Also aggressive, he observed, unimpressed. Also ineffective. Mr. Shi doesn't want you harmed. But he didn't say you had to be comfortable. Put down the knife and step away from the laptop. Through the broken doorway, she could see the city lights, the rain, the life she'd built for herself, disappearing into the same kind of darkness she'd spent years analyzing from a safe distance. The knife felt heavy in her hand, useless against whatever training this man had. 35%. Time's up, Miss Rios, the man said, and moved. The man moved like water, smooth and inevitable. Betty swung the knife in a wide arc that would have made any self-defense instructor weep, but he wasn't there anymore. He was beside her, his hand closing around her wrist with exactly enough pressure to make her fingers open involuntarily. The knife clattered into the sink. 41%, he said, glancing at the laptop screen with professional disinterest. Respectable effort, but the bleach was a mistake. Chemical destruction is slower than you think. He pulled a cable from his pocket and connected it to the laptop in one fluid motion, his device lighting up as it began copying whatever data remained untouched. Betty tried to pull away, but his grip was mechanical in its precision. Not cruel, just absolute. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, he said, almost kindly. Mr. Shi wants a conversation, not a corpse. 10 minutes later, she was in the back of the black sedan, her hands zip-tied in front of her with soft fabric restraints that spoke of experience with unwilling passengers. The man who'd taken her, she'd mentally nicknamed him Rain because of the water still dripping from his suit, sat beside her in professional silence, while another man she hadn't seen before drove through streets that grew progressively cleaner, taller, more expensive. They didn't blindfold her. That detail terrified her more than anything else. People who expected you to survive got blindfolded. People who didn't need to worry about witnesses didn't bother. The building they finally stopped at didn't have a name, just a street number in brushed steel above doors that whispered open before anyone touched them. The lobby was all black marble and indirect lighting, the kind of place where even the air felt wealthy. Rain guided her to a private elevator with a hand on her elbow, his touch polite but inescapable. The elevator didn't have buttons. It just knew where to go. They rose in silence that felt like drowning. Betty counted floors by the pressure in her ears. 20, 30, 40 stories, higher than she'd ever been in this city. When the doors finally opened, they revealed not a hallway but a single space that occupied the entire top floor. Shikang's penthouse was less a home and more a command center, disguised as one. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 3 walls, offering a 360-degree view of the city sprawled below like a circuit board. But it was the technology that made Betty's analytical mind wake up, despite her fear. Holographic displays floated in mid-air showing data streams she recognized. Financial markets, security camera feeds, shipping manifests. Quantum processors hummed in climate-controlled glass cases. This wasn't just expensive. This was custom, cutting-edge, the kind of setup that governments used for cyber warfare. And in the center of it all, silhouetted against the window with the rain-soaked city as his backdrop, stood Shikang. He was younger than she'd imagined from his voice, maybe late 30s, with the kind of sharp features that photographs loved and people feared. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a corporate executive or a classical statue, beautiful in a way that was precise and cold. He wore black, expensive and understated, and when he turned to look at her, his eyes were the color of winter storms. Miss Rios. He said her name like he was tasting it, deciding if it was worth keeping. Please, sit. Rain, the restraints aren't necessary anymore. Rain cut the zip ties with a knife that appeared and disappeared so quickly, Betty almost thought she'd imagined it. He gestured to a chair positioned in front of a desk that looked like a solid piece of obsidian. She sat because her legs weren't entirely sure they could keep holding her up. Shikang moved to the desk, but he didn't sit. He stood behind it, one hand resting on the surface, studying her with the intensity of someone solving a complex equation. Behind him, the holographic displays shifted, and Betty saw her own face appear on one screen. Her driver's license photo, her Columbia graduation picture, a screenshot from her LinkedIn profile. You're wondering why you're still alive, he said. It wasn't a question. The thought had crossed my mind. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. Honest. Good. He gestured to the screens around them. I don't deal in blunt instruments, Miss Rios. I deal in information, leverage, and very precise applications of force. Killing you would be the blunt instrument approach. It's inelegant, comforting. A ghost of something that might have been a smile touched his lips. You broke the Henderson encryption tonight. That file was designed by a team of 6 security experts over the course of 3 months. You cracked it alone in 11 hours using consumer-grade hardware, and what I assume was excessive caffeine. Betty said nothing. Her mind was racing, trying to understand where this was going. The phone call you answered wasn't meant for you, Shikang continued. It was meant for a man named Marcus Chen, my head of security operations. A man I trusted with encrypted communications, personnel movements, and access to networks that could collapse my organization if compromised. He leaned forward slightly. A man who, I discovered 2 hours ago, has been selling those communications to my competitors for the last 6 months. The holographic display shifted again, showing chat logs, bank transfers, encrypted messages. Betty's pattern recognition instincts kicked in automatically, seeing the structure of the betrayal laid out like a constellation. Your number is 1 digit different from his new burner phone, Shikang said. A transposition error in my contact list, probably introduced when someone cloned my device last month. You answered a call meant to coordinate my assassination, Miss Rios. And in doing so, you may have accidentally saved my life. He moved around the desk, closing the distance between them until he stood directly in front of her chair. This close, she could see that his eyes weren't just gray. They had flecks of gold, like embers in ash. So now I have a problem, he said softly. You're a witness to information that makes you either an asset or a liability. Rain believes you're a liability. He's advised me to erase you from existence and move on. He paused, studying her face. But I think you might be something more valuable. I think you might be the only person in this city who can help me find the snake in my garden before he strikes again. And if I refuse, then Rain's recommendation stands, and you become a very elegant corpse. Shikang's expression didn't change. But I don't think you'll refuse. I've read your file, Miss Rios. You're brilliant, broke, and chronically underestimated. I'm offering you a chance to be none of those things. All you have to do is prove you're as smart as I think you are. Betty's mind worked through the implications, like running code through a compiler. Asset or liability, live or die. The choice wasn't really a choice at all, but she'd learned long ago that showing fear was the same as showing weakness, and weakness in a negotiation got you killed or underpaid, depending on the context. Show me the call log, she said. The original order you were giving when I answered. Shikang's eyebrow rose fractionally. Not quite surprise, but something close to it. He gestured, and one of the holographic displays expanded, floating between them like a ghost made of light. Text scrolled across the screen, coordinates, times, personnel assignments. The cleanup order. You gave coordinates for a warehouse in the industrial district, Betty said, standing up despite Rain's hand moving toward his jacket. She ignored him, focusing on the data. Pier 17, Building 4. You specified 3 teams, staggered entry, communications blackout protocol. Yes, Shikang's voice was neutral, but she could feel his attention sharpening. Standard procedure for sensitive operations, except it's not standard at all. She pointed to the coordinates, her fear transmuting into the kind of focused energy she got when patterns started emerging from chaos. Pier 17 doesn't have a Building 4. It was demolished 8 months ago after the fire. I know because I worked the insurance data analysis for the claim. The building's gone. It's just a concrete slab now. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded explosions. Shikang's hand moved across the holographic interface, pulling up satellite imagery. The pier appeared, and where Building 4 should have stood was exactly what Betty had described, in empty foundations, surrounded by chain-link fence and warning signs. Someone gave you bad intelligence, Betty continued, her words coming faster now as the pattern crystallized. They fed you coordinates for a building that doesn't exist, which means anyone you sent there would be exposed. No cover, no structure, just an empty lot surrounded by sightlines from every direction. A kill box, Rain said quietly from behind her. Exactly. Betty turned to look at Shikang, watching his face for any sign of whether she'd just bought herself more time or signed her death warrant faster. You said the call was supposed to go to Marcus Chen, your head of security, the man who's been selling you out. Continue. Shikang's voice had gone very soft. He wasn't selling your communications to competitors. Or not just that, Betty gestured to the display, to the neat rows of data that suddenly looked like a maze with teeth. He was setting you up. Tonight was supposed to be your end. You'd go to these coordinates personally, wouldn't you? That's your style. Hands-on leadership, setting an example. You'd have taken a small team, maintained radio silence, and walked into an empty lot where anyone with a rifle and a rooftop could take you out. The holographic display shifted as Shikang's fingers moved through it, pulling up more data. Personnel schedules, vehicle assignments, communication protocols. Each piece of information seemed to confirm what Betty was saying, the trap becoming more visible with every layer revealed. The staggered entry times, she continued, momentum carrying her forward. They're wrong too. Look at the intervals, 3 minutes between teams. That's not enough time to secure a perimeter, but it's perfect for isolating each group. Your teams would have arrived separately, confused about why the building wasn't there, and been taken out one by one before they could regroup or call for help. Shikang was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving across the data with the kind of cold precision she recognized from her own work. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge that made even Rain shift his weight. Rain, pull Marcus's full communication history for the last 72 hours. I want to know everyone he's talked to, every device he's accessed, every location he's visited. He turned back to Betty, and there was something new in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of respect that felt almost as dangerous. You saw this in what, 30 seconds? Closer to 20, Betty admitted. Pattern recognition is what I do. Data doesn't lie, but people manipulate it constantly. You learn to see the gaps, the things that don't fit. The transposition error in my contacts, Shikang said slowly, working through the logic. That wasn't an accident either. No, Betty shook her head. Marcus cloned your device last month, you said. He had access to your entire contact list. He changed one digit in his own number and created a near miss that would send any calls meant for him to a random civilian instead. Someone who couldn't warn you. Someone who'd just be confused and hang up. But you didn't hang up. I thought you were a client. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. I've been chasing the Smith contract for weeks. I was desperate enough to answer an unknown number. Shikang moved to the window, looking out over the city like a chess player studying a board. Marcus knew I'd call tonight. He knew I'd give the coordinates. He wanted that call to go nowhere, to ensure I showed up at the kill box without any warning. He turned back to her, and the gold flecks in his eyes caught the light from the displays. You intercepted a dead drop, Miss Rios. And in doing so, you exposed a coup. Rain appeared beside them, a tablet in his hand. Sir, Marcus went dark 40 minutes ago. His phone's off, his car's at his apartment, but building security says he never came home. His passport was scanned at a private airfield an hour ago. Running. Shikang's jaw tightened. He knows the trap failed. Pull his financials. I want to know where the money's coming from, and where he thinks he's going. Already on it, Rain said, fingers moving across the tablet. But we'll need help cracking his offshore accounts. He used military-grade encryption on everything. Shikang looked at Betty, and she knew what he was going to say before he said it. It seems, he said quietly, that you're about to become very useful, Miss Rios. How long would it take you to break into a man's entire financial history if I gave you unrestricted access to the kind of hardware most governments would kill for? Betty looked at the quantum processors humming in their cases, at the holographic displays showing data streams that made her old setup look like a calculator, at the man who'd kidnapped her now offering her the keys to a digital kingdom. Give me 2 hours, she said, and I'll show you everywhere Marcus Chen has ever hidden money, including whoever's been paying him to kill you. Betty worked like she was possessed, her fingers flying across keyboards that responded faster than thought, the quantum processors turning what should have been hours of brute force decryption into minutes of elegant penetration. Marcus Chen's digital life unspooled before her like a map to hell. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, shell corporations in Panama, cryptocurrency wallets scattered across the dark web like landmines. But it was the final account that made her blood run cold. The money's coming from inside, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus wasn't working for a rival organization. He was working for someone in yours. Shikang appeared beside her so quickly she almost jumped. Show me. She pulled up the transaction history, watching his face as the implications settled over him like frost. Regular payments, always in cryptocurrency, always from a wallet that traced back to an IP address inside this very building. Payments that had started small 6 months ago and grown progressively larger, culminating in a final transfer of $5 million made 3 hours ago. Someone in your inner circle paid Marcus to kill you tonight, Betty said, and they're probably wondering right now why you're still alive. The words had barely left her mouth when the lights died. Not flickering this time, but a complete blackout that plunged the penthouse into darkness, broken only by the glow of the holographic displays and the city lights beyond the windows. Emergency lighting should have kicked in. It didn't. Backup power's been cut, Rain said from somewhere in the darkness, his voice calm but urgent. Manual override. Someone with building access. Shikang's hand closed around Betty's arm, pulling her away from the desk. How many files did you download? All of them. They're on the tablet. Rain, the drives. A lighter flared in the darkness, and Betty saw Rain at the quantum processors, pulling out solid-state drives with practiced efficiency. The distant sound of elevator machinery echoed through the walls. Someone was coming up. The elevator was supposed to be locked, Betty said stupidly, her mind still processing the sudden shift from analysis to action. It was. Shikang's voice was ice and iron, which means whoever's coming has override codes. The same person who's been paying Marcus. He pulled her toward the windows, toward a section of wall that looked like solid glass but slid open at his touch, revealing a narrow maintenance corridor beyond. Rain, how long? 90 seconds, maybe less. Rain finished pulling the last drive, shoving them into a bag that already contained weapons Betty tried not to look at too closely. Emergency stairs are compromised. I'm seeing heat signatures on the stairwell cameras. They're boxing us in. Then we go down the express route. Shikang pulled what looked like a small remote from his pocket, pressing a sequence of buttons that made part of the floor retract, revealing a shaft that dropped into darkness. Not an elevator, something else. Some kind of emergency escape system. You have got to be kidding me, Betty breathed. Miss Rios, you've been useful so far. Don't ruin it by being difficult. He handed her what looked like a climbing harness, connected to a cable system she couldn't fully see in the darkness. Put this on. Now. Her hands shook as she struggled with the straps, muscle memory from a rock climbing phase in college coming back in fragments. Rain was already harnessed, checking weapons with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested he did this weekly. The elevator dinged, close now, maybe 2 floors away. Who's coming? She asked, cinching the final strap tight. Someone who knows this building as well as I do, Shikang said, his own harness already secured. Someone who has access to my systems, my codes, my security protocols. Someone I trusted enough to give them all of it. He met her eyes in the dim light, and she saw something new there. Not fear exactly, but a kind of cold fury that was almost worse. I have 7 people in my organization with that level of access. Rain is one of them. Sir, Rain said quietly, offense clear in his single syllable. Which means there are 6 others, and one of them just tried to have me killed in a parking lot. Shikang clipped his harness to the cable. And until we know which one, we can't go back to any of my properties, contact any of my people, or use any of my resources. We're ghosts as of right now. The elevator dinged. This floor. What about me? Betty's voice came out higher than she wanted. I'm not equipped for whatever this is. I analyze data. I don't. You're the only person in this city right now who I know for certain isn't trying to kill me, Shikang interrupted. Which makes you the most valuable asset I have. Rain can't watch digital threats while he's watching for bullets. I need eyes on cameras, traffic systems, communication networks. I need someone who can see the patterns before they become problems. I don't even have my laptop. You have something better. He tapped the tablet Rain had shoved into her hands, the one containing all of Marcus's files and, she realized, remote access to systems she'd only dreamed about. You have my entire digital infrastructure at your fingertips. Every camera in this city that I've ever compromised, every network I've ever penetrated, every backdoor I've ever installed. Congratulations, Miss Rios. You are now my eyes, my ears, and my early warning system. The elevator doors opened with a whisper of hydraulics. Voices in the hallway, professional and cold. Ready? Shikang asked, his hand on the release mechanism. No, Betty said honestly. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He hit the release, and the cable system engaged with a mechanical hum. Rain, suppress fire on my mark. Miss Rios, hold on and try not to scream. It attracts attention. The floor dropped away, and they fell into darkness as the first gunshots echoed from above, muzzle flashes lighting up the penthouse like lightning. Betty's stomach lurched into her throat, her hands white-knuckled on the harness straps, the tablet pressed against her chest like a talisman. The cable sang as they descended, the city lights blurring past in streaks of neon and rain. She didn't scream, but it was close. They hit ground level in what felt like seconds but was probably closer to 30, the cable system depositing them in an underground parking structure that smelled of oil and concrete. Rain was already moving, weapon drawn, checking corners with practiced efficiency. Shikang released his harness and immediately turned to Betty. Cameras, now. I need to know who came up in that elevator. Her hands were still shaking, but she opened the tablet, fingers finding the camera feeds through muscle memory and sheer force of will. The penthouse cameras were down, but the elevator's interior camera was still broadcasting. She rewound the footage, found the moment the doors had opened. 3 men in tactical gear, faces covered, moving with military precision. But it was the 4th figure that made her breath catch. Expensive suit, no mask, walking behind the others with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Do you recognize him? She asked, turning the tablet so Shikang could see. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. Yes, his name is Wei Liu, my CFO, the man who manages every dollar that moves through my organization. He looked at Rain, and something passed between them that didn't need words. We need a car, something that's not registered to any of our networks. On it, Rain said, disappearing into the shadows of the parking structure. Betty stood in the dim light, holding a tablet that contained enough information to topple an empire, wearing pajamas and no shoes, next to a man who'd kidnapped her less than 2 hours ago, and was now apparently the only thing standing between her and a bullet. This is insane, she whispered. Yes, Shikang agreed, his eyes scanning the darkness with predator wariness. But you're still alive, Miss Rios. In my world, that's what we call a win. The car Rain found was a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dented bumper and the faint smell of fast food and regret. It was perfect, anonymous, forgettable, the kind of vehicle that disappeared into traffic like water into sand. Betty climbed into the back seat while Shi Kang took the passenger side, his phone already pressed to his ear, making calls in Mandarin too rapid for her to follow. "Where are we going?" she asked as Rain pulled out of the parking structure, the tires squealing against wet concrete. "Anywhere that isn't here," Rain said, his eyes constantly moving between the mirrors and the road ahead. "First rule of survival, keep moving until you know where safe is." Betty pulled up the city's traffic camera network on the tablet, her fingers navigating through systems that should have required passwords and authorization she definitely didn't have. But Shi Kang's access codes opened doors like magic keys, revealing a view of the city as a living organism of light and movement. She could see their Honda on the screen, a small blue dot moving through a grid of streets and intersections. She could also see the 3 black SUVs that pulled out of an underground garage 2 blocks behind them. "We have company," she said, her voice tight. 3 vehicles, military-grade if the suspension profile is accurate. "They're moving fast." Shi Kang ended his call, turning to look at her. "Can you track them?" "Already am." She pulled up multiple camera feeds, creating a 3-dimensional map of the pursuit in her mind. "They're coordinated, professional. One's taking parallel streets to cut us off, the other 2 are boxing us in from behind. Distance? Closing fast. We have maybe 90 seconds before the lead vehicle reaches the intersection at 5th and Morrison. If they get there first, we're trapped." Rain's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I can lose 1, maybe 2. But 3 coordinated vehicles with a coordinator watching traffic patterns. We're outgunned." "Then we don't outgun them," Betty said, her analytical mind shifting from observation to action. "We outthink them." She pulled up the traffic light control system, a network she'd once explored for a client who definitely shouldn't have been asking about municipal infrastructure. "How confident are you in your driving?" Rain glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Very good. Because I'm about to make this interesting." Her fingers moved across the tablet, finding the intersection ahead, 5th and Morrison, where the lead SUV was trying to cut them off. The light was red in their direction, green for cross-traffic. She watched the timing, calculated the distances, and overrode the system. "Green in 3, 2, 1. Gun it." Rain didn't hesitate. The Honda surged forward, engine screaming in protest as they shot through the intersection, just as the light switched. Cross-traffic slammed on brakes, horns blaring, and the lead SUV skidded sideways trying to avoid a collision, its path to intercept them completely blocked by the chaos Betty had created. "That's 1, she said, already moving to the next intersection. "The other 2 are adapting. They're splitting up, trying to parallel us on 3rd and 7th. "Can you see inside the vehicles?" Shi Kang asked, his voice calm despite the speed and the danger. "Not clearly, but..." She zoomed in on the camera feeds, enhancing the images as much as the system would allow. 4 people per vehicle, all armed. The one on 3rd has someone in the back seat who's on a laptop. That's probably their coordinator. "Take out their eyes," Shi Kang said. "If they can't coordinate, they can't corner us." Betty understood immediately. She found the vehicle on 3rd, tracked its position through sequential camera feeds, and started manipulating traffic lights to create rolling chaos in its wake. Green lights turned red with perfect timing to trap the SUV behind sudden walls of cross-traffic. She added construction zone signals that weren't real, emergency vehicle preemption that rerouted traffic away from their Honda's path. "Left here," she called out, seeing the pattern before Rain could. "Then immediate right at the next block. There's a gap in their coverage." The Honda whipped around the corner hard enough to throw Betty against the door. Her shoulder hit the window, but she kept her grip on the tablet, kept her eyes on the feeds. The SUV on 7th was closing, its driver better than the others, anticipating her moves. "The one on 7th is smart," she muttered. "He's not following the lights, he's following prediction algorithms. He knows where we're going before we do. Then go somewhere unpredictable," Shi Kang said. Betty's mind raced through options, through street layouts and traffic patterns, and the thousands small pieces of data she'd absorbed about this city over years of late-night analysis. Then she saw it. The construction zone on 8th, the one that had been closed for 3 months while they rebuilt the overpass. Officially closed. But the barriers were just orange cones and sawhorse warnings, and the actual road surface was intact. Rain, next right, then straight through the construction zone on 8th. "That's closed," Rain said, but he was already turning. "It's passable. Trust me." She pulled up the municipal construction database, confirming what she'd remembered. "The road's fine, they just have equipment staged on the sides. But their pursuit vehicles won't follow. Too much liability, too much risk of getting trapped in an official work zone." The Honda shot through the gap in the barriers, construction equipment looming on either side like metal dinosaurs. Rain navigated by the glow of work lights, and Betty watched the feeds as the SUV on 7th slowed, stopped, unwilling to follow into the maze. "That's two," Rain said, a hint of something that might have been admiration in his voice. "The third one's looping around," Betty warned. "They're trying to catch us when we exit the construction zone." "Where does this come out?" Shikang asked. Betty checked the maps. 2 blocks north, right into the financial district. Heavy traffic, lots of cameras, very public. "Perfect." Shikang pulled out his phone again. "Rain, when we exit, head for the Meridian Hotel. Miss Rios, I need you to make us disappear for exactly 45 seconds, long enough to reach the hotel's underground parking. I can blind the cameras, but not blind them. Loop them. Show them footage from 5 minutes ago. Make it look like we never entered." Betty's fingers were already moving, pulling up the camera feeds for the financial district, finding the right angles, the right timing. It was the kind of hack that required split-second precision, and more than a little luck. "This is going to be tight." "Everything about tonight has been tight," Shikang said. "You're doing fine." The Honda burst out of the construction zone into a sea of headlights and glass towers. Betty executed the loop, replacing live feeds with cached footage, creating a 45-second window where they simply didn't exist in the city's digital eye. Rain drove like he was conducting surgery, precise and fast, sliding into the hotel's underground entrance just as the third SUV passed by on the street above, its occupants staring at camera feeds that showed nothing but normal traffic. In the darkness of the parking structure, Rain killed the engine. For a moment, the only sound was their breathing and the distant hum of ventilation systems. "Did we lose them?" Rain asked. Betty checked the feeds, watching the SUV circle the block once, twice, then finally peel away in frustration. "For now. But they'll figure out we looped the cameras eventually. We have maybe 10 minutes before they start searching hotels." Shikang looked at her in the dim light, and for the first time since she'd answered that wrong number, she saw something other than calculation in his eyes. "You just outmaneuvered a coordinated pursuit team, using nothing but traffic lights and construction zones. Where did you learn to do that?" "Video games mostly," Betty admitted. "And a very questionable client 2 years ago who wanted to know how vulnerable municipal systems were to cyber attack. I wrote a whole report on it that nobody read." Rain actually laughed, a short bark of sound that echoed in the parking structure. "I read it. It's why the boss upgraded our vehicle security protocols last year." Betty blinked. "You read my report?" "We read everything worth reading, Miss Rios," Shikang said, opening his door. "Now come on. We need to move before our 10 minutes become 9. The hotel room Shikang secured wasn't on any official registry. It belonged to a network of safe houses he'd built over the years, rooms that existed in the cracks between legitimate business and necessary survival. 18th floor, corner unit, with views of the city that would have been beautiful if Betty had any capacity left to appreciate beauty. She sat at the desk with the tablet, running traces on Wei Liu's communications, while Rain swept the room for bugs and Shikang made calls that grew progressively more tense. The picture emerging from the data was worse than she'd initially thought. Wei Liu hadn't just paid Marcus to orchestrate an assassination. He'd been systematically hollowing out Shikang's organization for months, redirecting funds, compromising security, building a shadow empire within the existing structure. "He's been planning this for at least 8 months, Betty said, pulling up financial records that painted a timeline of betrayal. Small moves at first, testing to see if anyone would notice. When nobody did, he got bolder. He's been positioning himself to take over the moment you were gone. How many of my people are compromised?" Shikang's voice was controlled, but she could hear the fury beneath it. "At least a dozen that I can confirm. Maybe more." She highlighted names on the screen, watching his face as people he'd trusted revealed themselves as traitors. "He's offering them percentage increases, better positions in the new structure. He's essentially buying your organization out from under you." Rain's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression went dark. "Sir, we have a problem. Hotel security just reported a group of men asking about guests on the upper floors. They're showing photos." "Our photos," Shikang said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. We have maybe 5 minutes before they start a floor-by-floor search." Betty's mind raced through options, through exits and alternatives, and the rapidly shrinking window of survival. "The roof. We can. They'll have it covered," Shikang interrupted. "Wei knows how I think. He'll have positioned people at every logical exit." He moved to the window, looking down at the streets below where black vehicles were already pulling up, disgorging men who moved with military precision. "He's not trying to kill me quietly anymore. This is a message. He wants everyone to know he's the one who took me down." "Then we fight," Rain said, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. "Against how many?" Shikang's laugh was bitter. "I count at least 20 men down there, and that's just what we can see." Wei's emptied half my personnel budget into this coup. We're outgunned, outmanned, and out of time. Betty stared at the tablet, at the financial records still scrolling across the screen, at the network of betrayal and greed that had brought them to this moment. And then she saw it. The pattern within the pattern. The vulnerability that Wei Liu had overlooked in his rush to power. We can't outgun them, she said slowly, her fingers already moving across the keyboard. But we can bankrupt them. Both men turned to look at her. Wei's been paying his people with promises, she continued, speaking faster as the idea crystallized. Future earnings, percentage increases, positions in the new structure. But all of that requires money from accounts he controls. Accounts that he thinks are secure and untraceable. She pulled up the offshore banking networks, the cryptocurrency wallets, the shell corporations that formed Wei Liu's hidden empire. What if those accounts suddenly became very public? What if everyone, his people, your people, law enforcement, competitors, could see exactly how much he's stolen and where he's hidden it? Shi Kang moved closer, understanding dawning in his eyes. His people are mercenaries. They're following money, not loyalty. If that money disappears, it doesn't just disappear, Betty interrupted. It gets exposed. Every transaction, every payment, every promise he's made. I leak it all, right now, to every network that matters. Financial regulators, competing organizations, anonymous tip lines. I make Wei Liu radioactive. His people will abandon him, Rain said. Nobody wants to work for someone who's about to be investigated by 6 different agencies. More than that, Betty added, her fingers flying across the tablet. Some of these accounts show payments Wei received from external sources, competitors of yours, who've been funding his coup. If I leak those, he's not just a traitor to you. He's a traitor to everyone. He becomes the one thing worse than a criminal in your world. A liability, Shi Kang finished. Someone nobody can afford to protect. Exactly. Betty looked up at him. I can do this. I can strip him of everything in about 3 minutes. But once I start, there's no taking it back. This is nuclear option territory. Everyone will know your organization's structure, your financial networks, your vulnerabilities. They'll also know I don't tolerate betrayal, Shi Kang said. He placed his hand on the desk beside the tablet, his decision made. Do it. Betty's fingers moved across the screen, compiling data packets and building distribution networks faster than she'd ever worked. She routed the information through anonymous servers, through whistleblower sites, and financial watchdog organizations and forums, where criminals and law enforcement both lurked. Wei Liu's offshore accounts materialized on screens across the dark web like mushrooms after rain. $40 million in the Caymans, $60 million in cryptocurrency, shell corporations in Panama, Luxembourg, Singapore, payments from the Iron Brotherhood, from the Golden Tiger Syndicate, from a dozen other organizations that would see Wei's cooperation as unforgivable treachery. And names. So many names. People Wei had bribed, compromised, promised fortunes they would never receive. Betty hit send, and the information exploded across the digital landscape like a bomb. Rain's phone started buzzing. Then Shi Kang's. Then both phones were ringing constantly, vibrating against table surfaces with incoming calls that neither man answered. They just watched the tablet screen as Betty pulled up social networks, message boards, encrypted chat rooms, where Wei Liu's name was suddenly appearing in contexts, ranging from shock to fury to cold calculation. The men outside, Rain said, checking his own feeds. They're getting calls. Multiple vehicles are leaving. Shi Kang moved to the window. Betty joined him, watching as the coordinated assault force below suddenly became a confused collection of individuals checking phones, arguing, disbanding. 2 of the black vehicles pulled away. Then 3 more. Within 90 seconds, only a handful of men remained, and they looked more concerned with leaving than with storming the hotel. Wei's second-in-command just posted a bounty, Rain said, reading from his phone. For Wei Liu. Dead or alive, 20 million. The Iron Brotherhood issued a kill order, Shi Kang added, his own phone displaying messages in rapid succession. So did the Golden Tigers. Wei just became the most hunted man in the city. Betty's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She answered it on speaker. You fucking bitch. Wei Liu's voice was raw with panic and rage. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, Betty said calmly. I made you everyone's problem. Which means you're now nobody's asset. Shi Kang, you're there. I know you are. We can still work this out. I'll give you back everything. Where are you, Wei? Shi Kang's voice cut through the pleading like ice. Silence. Then the call disconnected. He's running, Rain said. Every airport, every border crossing, every exit from this city. He's burned at every single one of them now. Shi Kang turned to Betty, and something had shifted in his expression. Not gratitude exactly, but a kind of recognition that felt more valuable. You just dismantled a coup without firing a single shot. Information is ammunition, Betty said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I just pointed it at the right target. The rain started again around 3 in the morning, washing the city clean in that way. Rain never actually did, but always promised to. Betty watched it from the window of the hotel room, her body exhausted, but her mind still running at full speed, unable to shut down after the adrenaline and fear and strange exhilaration of the night. Rain had left an hour ago to, quote, handle cleanup, a phrase that Betty tried not to think about too carefully. The tablet sat on the desk behind her, still displaying incoming notifications as Weyliu's empire continued to collapse in real time. Competing organizations were already moving to claim territory, to absorb personnel, to fill the vacuum that betrayal and exposure had created. It was like watching a nature documentary about predators, efficient and brutal and utterly without mercy. Shi Kang stood at the opposite window, his jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up, looking out at the rain-soaked city with an expression she couldn't quite read. He'd been silent for the last 20 minutes, just standing there, and Betty found herself oddly comfortable with the quiet. Most people felt the need to fill silence with words, with noise, with anything to avoid the weight of unspoken thoughts. But Shi Kang's silence felt different, not empty, but full. Like still water that ran deep. You should be terrified of me, he said finally, not turning from the window. Most people are by this point in the acquaintance. Betty considered that. Considered the fear she'd felt when he'd first spoken her address, when rain had kicked in her door, when they'd fallen through darkness with gunfire chasing them. I was terrified, she admitted. For most of tonight, actually. But fear and terror aren't the same thing. Explain. Fear is rational. It keeps you sharp, makes you think, helps you survive. Terror is just noise. It shuts down your brain when you need it most. She turned to look at him, at the silhouette he made against the window, with the city lights painting him in shades of neon and shadow. You're dangerous, obviously. But you're not randomly dangerous. You're precise. Calculated. There's a logic to it, and logic I can work with. That's a surprisingly analytical way to view someone who kidnapped you. I'm a surprisingly analytical person. She moved to stand beside him at the window, close enough to see his reflection in the glass. Besides, you didn't really kidnap me. You conscripted me. There's a difference. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Is there? Kidnapping implies I'm a victim. Conscription implies I'm a resource. She gestured to the tablet, to the evidence of what they'd accomplished together. I stopped being a victim somewhere around the time I started manipulating traffic lights. After that, I was just someone with skills being applied to a problem. And that doesn't bother you? Being used? Everyone's being used by someone, Betty said. At least you were honest about it. My legitimate clients lie about their intentions all the time, dress up exploitation in corporate language, and talk about opportunities when they mean unpaid overtime and deferred payment. You just said, work for me or die, and let me make an informed choice. Shi Kang actually laughed at that, a real sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. That's a deeply cynical worldview for someone who works in data analysis. Data analysis is what made me cynical. Numbers don't lie, but the people interpreting them do, constantly. At least with you, the variables are clear. Stay useful, stay alive. Stop being useful. She trailed off, not quite willing to finish that sentence. Stop being useful, and you become a liability. Shi Kang finished for her. Yes, that's how my world works. He turned to face her directly, and this close she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of maintaining an empire built on fear and precision. But you're not a liability, Miss Rios. You're something I haven't had in a very long time. What's that? Someone who isn't afraid of my silence. He said it simply, like stating a fact, but she heard the deeper meaning underneath. Everyone else, my people, my competitors, even Rain, they fill the quiet with words because they think silence means I'm calculating how to use them or discard them. They're usually right. But you, he gestured to the space between them, to the comfortable quiet they'd shared. You just exist in it, like silence is a natural state rather than a threat. Betty thought about that, about all the nights she'd spent alone in her apartment, with nothing but the hum of servers and the distant sounds of the city for company. I work with data. Data is silent. It just sits there waiting for someone to understand it, to see the patterns. I guess I'm used to quiet being where the answers are, instead of where the danger is. Except tonight, the quiet was definitely where the danger was. True, but I survived it anyway. She looked back out at the city, at the lights reflecting off rain-slicked streets, at the evidence of a life she'd built and nearly lost and somehow still had. What happens now? Way's gone, the coup's crushed, your organization is probably going to need serious restructuring. Where does that leave someone like me? Shi Kang was quiet for a long moment, his eyes tracking the movement of cars below, the patterns of light and shadow that made up their city. That depends on what you want, I suppose. I could pay you for tonight's work and send you back to your apartment with enough money to finally get that Smith contract you were chasing. You could go back to your old life like none of this ever happened. Could I, though? Betty asked. Could any of us pretend tonight didn't happen? No, he admitted. Probably not. Which brings us to the alternative. Which is? He turned to face her fully, and in his expression she saw the same calculating intelligence she'd been using all night, the same pattern recognition that had kept them both alive. You're brilliant at seeing things other people miss. You think in systems and patterns. You're comfortable with moral ambiguity. And you just proved you can function under pressure in ways most of my trained personnel can't. He paused, letting those facts settle between them. I'm going to need to rebuild my inner circle with people I can actually trust. That's a very small pool of candidates right now. You're offering me a job. It wasn't a question. I'm offering you a choice. The same choice I gave you in the penthouse. Really, just with better context. Work with me, not for me, with me, and help me build something more resilient than what Wei almost destroyed. Or take the money and go back to chasing clients who won't appreciate what you can actually do. Betty looked at the tablet, at her reflection in the window, at the man who'd turned her world upside down and somehow made her feel more alive than she'd felt in years. If I say yes, I want guarantees. Real ones, not just promises. Such as, I want full access to the systems I'd be protecting. I want the authority to implement security protocols without needing approval. And I want to know exactly what I'm protecting and why. She met his eyes. I'll work with moral ambiguity, but I won't work blind. Done, Shikang said without hesitation. Anything else? Yeah. I want my own apartment. One with better security than my last place, obviously, but still mine. I'm not living in some corporate housing situation where I never feel like I can leave. Reasonable. Rain will hate it from a security standpoint, but I can live with reasonable risk. He extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, Miss Rios? Betty looked at his hand, at the choice crystallized in that simple gesture. Behind her was the life she'd built, safe, small, slowly suffocating in its predictability. Ahead was something unknown and dangerous, and probably insane. She shook his hand. We have an agreement, but you have to stop calling me Miss Rios. If we're going to work together, you can at least use my first name. Betty, he said, testing the name. It suits you better than I expected. And I should probably know your first name too, since Mr. Shi seems weirdly formal after you've saved my life and I've saved yours. Kang, he said. Though most people don't use it. I'm not most people. No, he agreed, and this time his smile was genuine. You're definitely not. 3 weeks later, Betty stood in her new apartment, 22nd floor, corner unit, with security systems that would make a government facility jealous and windows that overlooked the city in ways that felt both familiar and entirely new. Rain had personally supervised the installation of everything from biometric locks to signal jammers, grumbling the entire time about how ground floor units were more defensible, but ultimately admitting that visibility had its own tactical advantages. The furniture was mostly hers, salvaged from her old place along with her servers and monitors. Shikang's people had retrieved everything while she'd been busy rebuilding his digital infrastructure from the ground up, identifying compromised systems, implementing new protocols, and generally making herself indispensable, in ways that felt more satisfying than any corporate contract ever had. She hadn't seen Kang in person since that night in the hotel. He'd been busy with what Rain euphemistically called organizational restructuring, meetings with lieutenants, negotiations with rivals, the careful work of rebuilding trust in an empire that had nearly collapsed from within. They'd communicated through encrypted channels, through data reports and security briefings, through the professional distance that felt appropriate for whatever their working relationship had become. But she thought about him. More than was probably wise. The doorbell chimed, a soft melodic sound that Rain had insisted was less jarring than traditional buzzers. Betty checked the video feed out of habit, saw the familiar silhouette, and felt something in her chest tighten that had nothing to do with fear. She opened the door. Kang stood in the hallway wearing dark jeans and a fitted black shirt, noticeably absent the suits and tactical urgency that had defined their first encounters. He looked younger somehow, less like a criminal mastermind, and more like someone who might actually enjoy things like coffee and conversation. He held out her phone, her original phone, the one that had started everything. I believe this belongs to you, he said. Rain recovered it from your old apartment. We've upgraded the security, obviously, but otherwise it's exactly as you left it. Betty took the phone, turning it over in her hands. The screen was cracked from when she dropped it that first night, a spiderweb pattern that served as a reminder of how quickly everything had changed. You could have just had Rain deliver this. I could have, Kang agreed. But I wanted to see the apartment. Make sure it meets your standards. It's perfect. Probably too perfect, actually. I keep waiting for the catch. No catch. Just a secure living space for a valuable member of my organization. He stepped into the apartment when she gestured, his eyes moving across the space with the same analytical precision she recognized from her own work. Though I notice you haven't changed the view orientation, still facing the city center. I like watching the patterns, Betty said, closing the door behind him. Traffic flows, light distributions, the way people move through urban spaces. It's soothing. Most people find it overwhelming. I'm not most people. She set the phone on the kitchen counter, noticed her hands were steadier than she'd expected them to be. So this is what, an exit interview? You return my property, make sure I'm settled, and then we maintain professional distance forever? Kang turned to look at her, and something in his expression suggested he'd been asking himself the same question. I told you that night you were free to go. That still stands. You fulfilled your end of our agreement. The security upgrades to my systems are exceptional. The new protocols are exactly what we needed, and you've proven yourself valuable enough that I'd be a fool to let you walk away. But I'm not in the habit of keeping people who don't want to be kept. That's very noble of you, Betty said, hearing the slight edge in her own voice. Very magnanimous. The crime lord with a conscience. You're angry. I'm confused. She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture she recognized but couldn't quite stop. For 3 weeks, you've been perfectly professional. Reports and protocols and encrypted messages about security vulnerabilities. No personal contact. No unnecessary communication. And now you show up at my door with my phone like we're wrapping up loose ends. Would you prefer unnecessary communication? I'd prefer honesty. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. I'd prefer knowing whether I'm an employee or an ally or just someone convenient who happened to save your life. Because right now I feel like I'm in some kind of professional limbo, where I can't figure out the rules. Kang was quiet for a moment, that comfortable silence she'd learned to read like text. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. The rules are complicated because you're complicated. You don't fit into any category I have for people. You're not personnel, you have too much autonomy. You're not an ally in the traditional sense. You didn't choose this world, you stumbled into it. And you're definitely not just someone convenient. Then what am I? Someone I think about more than I should, he said simply. Someone whose opinion matters in ways that make strategic sense, and also don't. Someone I wanted to see in person instead of just on a video feed because... He trailed off, something almost like uncertainty crossing his features. Betty's phone buzzed on the counter. They both looked at it. The screen lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number, except it wasn't unknown. She recognized the encrypted prefix, recognized the routing signature. Kang's number. She looked at him standing 3 feet away in her living room, looked at the phone displaying his call, looked back at him with questions in her eyes. Answer it, he said quietly. Betty picked up the phone, swiped to accept the call, and held it to her ear, even though he was right there, even though it made no logical sense. Hi, his voice came through the speaker, warm and slightly distorted by encryption. I know this is unconventional, but I've learned that sometimes the wrong number turns out to be exactly the right one. She couldn't help it. She smiled. Are you seriously calling me while standing in my apartment? I wanted to give you a choice, he said, and now she could see his lips moving, could match the voice in her ear to the man in front of her. You can hang up and tell me this is too complicated, too dangerous, too much. You can set boundaries and keep things professional, and I'll respect that completely. Or, he paused, and she heard him take a breath through the phone. Or you can answer on purpose. Not because you're desperate for a client, not because someone's holding a gun, but because you want to. Betty looked at him, at this man who'd turned her life into something thrilling and terrifying, and impossibly alive. She thought about safe choices, and corporate clients, and the slow suffocation of predictability. She thought about traffic lights, and falling through darkness, and the strange comfort of his silence. She ended the call. For a moment, disappointment flickered across Kang's face. Then she stepped forward, closing the distance between them until she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, until the space between them was electric with possibility. I don't need the phone, she said. I'm answering in person. He smiled, real and unguarded in ways she suspected he rarely allowed himself. That works too. Her phone buzzed again. They both ignored it. Some calls were worth missing. Some wrong numbers led exactly where they were supposed to go. Outside, the city sprawled beneath them in patterns of light and shadow, rain beginning to fall again in that endless cycle of washing clean and starting over. Betty had answered a call by mistake, and somehow, impossibly, it had led her here, to a new apartment, a new life, and someone who understood that silence could be comfortable and danger could be exhilarating. And sometimes, the best connections were the ones you never saw coming. She'd stopped running from screens and started running towards something real. And this time, she was choosing it on purpose. Thanks for watching. Please like, comments, and subscribe for more.